we have for your amusement and edification Dr. Joanna Williams, who is the author of How Woke Won, or Why Woke Won, or How Woke Won, yeah. And has it won, we might ask. And alongside Joanna, we have Viv Regan, who's the managing editor of Spiked Online, and as we were talking earlier, runs some interesting programs for young journalists, which are trying to teach journalists to be properly critical, not critical theorists. So we're talking about the infantilization of debate and free speech. So today, lived experience is often the trump card in debate. A deference to identity allows an often privileged minority to present themselves as victims and silence opposition. In the media, the universities, and the workplace, hurt feelings routinely justify censorship. Those who offend not only risk losing their livelihood, they can even face accusations of hate speech and derive a police record. On campus, in the art world, in publishing and journalism, those who cry loudest about their suffering can wield considerable power. How has this situation come about, and how do we challenge it to reassert the importance of free speech? Is it fair to brand a younger generation snowflake? Is being offended really all that empowering? So in order to discuss these questions, we'll start with, we'll pass the discussion first to Joanna and then to Viv. So how has this situation come about?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there's one straightforward answer to that question, because we're talking about huge political trends that have been set in over the course of several decades. I think there's various things which have contributed to the rise of what we're terming here the cry bully. We can look at the rise of identity politics, but I think we can also look at the rise of a victimhood culture, a trend in society that really celebrates individual vulnerability in a way that previous generations never really did. And I think this has become quite a big trend in society more broadly. You can see a lot of concern, for example, about mental health, which is rightly so. You know, we need to be concerned, particularly people with serious mental health problems. But at the same time, we've got an expansion of the definition of mental health to encompass what I would describe as actually being quite normal life stages that people go through, feeling down in response and feeling sad in response to bad things that happen, you know, isn't a mental health problem. That's not depression. To me, that's called being a kind of a normal human being, or feeling anxious or worried about an exam or a test at school, again, is a very normal human response. But in our society at the moment, we seem to have problematized these normal human emotions into the idea of kind of pathologized these normal human emotions into a way that tells people that they've got mental health problems, that they are victims in society, and kind of elevates that status as meaning that you derive your kind of specialness, if you like, from having this status as somebody who's vulnerable. And I think this very much ties in with identity politics and the idea that your skin color or your gender identity, if that's a real thing, or your sex or your sexuality also determines how you see the world and can turn you into somebody who's got particular vulnerabilities.
And what do you think, Viv, about this situation? Where did it all start?
Oh, well, what's interesting is that even 3 years ago, not so many years ago, we were able to say things that was just very mainstream to say, very ordinary. And now, in the UK anyway, and in the US, you can't say them. So you can't say, I don't believe that a man can become a woman. You can't say that anymore. So I'm with Joanna. It's a difficult one to answer because I think there's lots of different trends that are coming to fruition here. But I also agree with Joanna in this. With the big one is becoming a victim. So before, it's really good that society and government care for the victims, perhaps, of our society, people who need our help. Whereas now, victimhood is valorized. It's good to be a victim. Whereas there is no valor in being a victim. And when I work with young people, you can see how much they wear it as a badge of honor. And that is particularly worrying.
I mean, I think just to put in, a good example of that, I think, is when you look at instances of people assuming a different identity. I mean, I know this is a very rare kind of subset of people, but historically, there've always been a very, very small section of people who, for whatever reason, have assumed a fake identity. But if you go back 100 years, the kind of identity that people would fake would be the identity of a hero, of a kind of a higher status identity to the one that they had naturally. So, people would try and assume the identity of a war hero, for example, or you had cases of women 100 years ago who wanted to do what men were doing, either on the battlefield or in the workplace, assuming the identity of men, which is not to say they were transgender. They weren't transgender. They just recognized that if you wanted to get on in life, you faked the identity of somebody who was in a more powerful position. Whereas what we see today is the 100% reversal of that, where when people fake an identity today, they fake the identity of somebody from a less powerful group. So obviously, a very high-profile example of this in recent years would be somebody like Rachel Dolezal. I'm sure people have heard of the American, not just but she actually had the balls to pass herself off as running the American a branch of the American Association for the Advancement of People of Color. She went a long way with this. She took it very, very seriously. But clearly, she's not the only one. There've been a number of people who do this, and to me, that says that there's something going on here. And what's going on is that people are recognizing that there is a status and a power and a career advancement, if we want to put it very, very crudely, that comes with assuming the status of somebody from a less socially privileged group, from a less historically advantaged group, in a complete reversal on trends that have been as they were 100 years ago.
And something to do with that is about truth, I suppose, isn't it? That we've got a problem with truth these days.
Yeah, I mean, what happens is that truth has been subordinated for feelings. And you can't disprove or prove feelings. It's just my feelings. So if I'm hurt and they're my feelings, then that's the truth. So that makes it very difficult. And I think about truth because I work in the media. I'm extremely concerned with the fact that these days, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what it might be like in Hungary. But in the UK, the US, now the media has gone from seeing recording of facts really important to being politically righteous. And, there's loads of examples about it, but Hunter Biden is a big one. Russiagate, the idea that there was Russia was interfering with the US election. None of this was actually factually true. But even when they found out that this wasn't factually true, and even when they found out that Hunter Biden did actually do all the things he did, it didn't matter. We've still got to cover it up, or we've still got to lie about it because we want to be the right side of history. We want to be the ideological ideas of today are much more important than truth and facts. Very worrying, right?
But, just to come off on that, I think the point Viv's making there about truth kind of superseding, feelings, superseding a more objective reality, I think is such an important point. I think that's absolutely crucial to understanding what's going on here. And again, Viv's talking about how this plays out in relation to the media, but you absolutely see this having roots in universities as well. And the idea, again, set in place over the course of many decades, that we move away from a kind of a search for objectivity, or even an aspiration for objectivity, towards, first of all, an idea that truth is relative, that truth is multiple, towards an idea that truth is perspectival, that this is a question of your individual perspective, and taken to the logical extreme, the idea of standpoint theory, that everybody has their own individual standpoint, their own version of truth, ultimately their own version of reality. And you can see how this plays out then in everyday discourse with the phrase lived experience, and the phrase that I think Harry and Megan, we agreed, had come to encapsulate this idea of my truth. And who cares about objective reality? Who cares about the truth when you've got my truth? And, there are so many problems with this, but just thinking about one in particular, it makes all debate very, very difficult, because I think the fact that we can have this debate and a broader dialogue, you have to assume some common understanding of the meaning of words. You have to have some common basis of facts that you accept about the way the world is. As soon as you say, well, everybody's got their own truth, everybody's got their own perception of reality, it actually makes advancing any argument very, very difficult, because there can never be a winner. You can never say, well, my argument's better than your argument, because you're just looking at different, all you can do is acknowledge, yes, that's how you feel, that's how you feel. But you can never actually work towards a kind of a greater truth in that.
Well, there's also, you say this is just absolute relativism, which is a contradiction in terms, actually, but it's relativism taken to the max. But alongside that, there is also, so everybody's got their own truth, everybody's got their own understanding of the world, except some people have got the wrong understanding. Yeah. So it's not absolute, it's not relativism at all, really. That lurking behind relativism is a massive moral absolutism. Yeah. So how does that work, do you think?
Well, in all sorts of ways, but I agree with you. There's we call it kind of double speak. It's the George Orwell. You feel like you're in a book, actually, in the UK, a George Orwell book, because it's the same thing as when I hear we're an inclusive university or an inclusive media publication, and you know what that means. It means we're excluding you. So inclusivity now means exclusion.
And diversity.
And diversity, doesn't mean what it means. And actually, what we hear, the cry bullies, the thing about always saying that my truth is really important, the most important thing, because I'm a victim or I'm hurt or this is me. What it does also is that it constantly needs validation. So it constantly needs the validation, and of who? Of everybody, and all the adults, and the government, and any other institution and power that may be. And you can't get enough validation, because victims can never get enough, or cry bullies can never get enough validation. So you might be able to take a scalp on Twitter. You might be able to counsel somebody or get them to lose their jobs, as has happened in the last 7 years in the media, with catastrophic effect. But it's never enough.
No, I think that's absolutely right. But to come back to the point you're making, I think it would be a relativist position if we were saying, everybody's got their own truth and everybody's truths are equally valid. But of course, that's not what we're saying, is it? And this is where I think identity politics really comes in, because
That's the only truth.
well, it is, but it puts a kind of an additional spin on some people's individual truths, and it downplays other people's individual truths, which is not to say I think celebrating individual truth is a good thing in and of itself, but by identity politics imposing this framework where we judge everyone as carrying with them an innate sense of privilege or oppression, and then having a kind of framework, a social justice framework that seeks to impose its own values and overturn, what ideas of privilege and oppression based on kind of skin color, sexuality, gender identity, sex, etc. You're saying that you can have your truth, but because you've got this particular skin color and this particular sexuality, that doesn't actually count, and you've got to shut up so that we can let other people who've got a different skin color, different sexuality, we can uplift them and let them speak. And it's this, but what this ultimately does, and this is where I think the points Viv's making about validation come in as being so important, it actually hands huge amounts of power over to the people who are the ones who are then sitting in judgment and saying, in order to let the transgender black woman speak, you, white man, you must shut up. And we're not making this decision based upon the quality of your arguments. We're not making this decision based upon the objective reality or the objective truth you want to talk about. We're making this decision purely on the basis of the most basic characteristics about you. But we have got the power now to determine that your truth as a member of a victimized group is more important than another truth coming from a person from a different identity group. And I think that's very insidious, the way that plays out.
And only if you agree with them.
Oh,
so, if you're a black, I had a recent conversation with a black young journalist, and she was saying to me that she was being told that all white people are racist. So she said, no, I'm not sure you're right about that. And she was called a coconut. So, it's okay for other. So, and she was absolutely gobsmacked with this. So, she's black, she's young, she's a woman, but she's still wrong.
Because there's an adherence to a particular political opinion, and unless you are saying the right political opinion, then your views don't count. And I think that just exposes exactly the example you've used there, just really exposes how backward this is and how regressive this is, even though woke people, to use that word, try and present themselves as being progressive, being enlightened, being at the forefront of social justice. The problem is it's anything but. It's the exact opposite of all of those things, by saying, essentially, to me, what the kind of woke outlook is saying is that people should be judged first and foremost on the basis of their biology, on the basis of their skin color, on the basis of their sex. And personally, I feel as if I've spent my entire life fighting to be taken seriously on the basis of my ideas, on the basis of what I want to talk about, on the basis of what I think. And I think that the kind of the basic biological fact of me being a woman is kind of the least interesting thing about me that there is. And yet I feel as if in society today, I'm being told as if the starting point to everything I say should be the fact that I am, as I would be told to say, a cis white woman, as if that should form the basis of how everything I say is then judged. but it really takes us very, very backwards. And the example you're using, I think, just really shows very neatly how this re-racializes society, how it forces us to see and judge people according to their skin color in a way that, a more progressive society, we would have completely moved away from that.
And I suppose related to this, although it wants to, or the thinking wants to liberate, emancipate. In fact, it's doing the exact. It seems to be that unless you agree with the program, then you're silenced or cancelled. So, I mean, it's very strange that from a relatively liberal society or pretty open society 20 years ago, we've come to such a pass so rapidly, really. I mean, it started in the university. The universities were always on this sort of critical theory idea that capitalism was flawed, liberalism was a disaster. But it seemed like limited to a small section of the, social sciences and philosophy departments. But now it's been taken up on by an elite, really, not just in universities, but in government, but also transnationally. I mean, why have they bought into this? I mean, is it just a part of a managerial program?
I mean, I think that's a large part of it, but I think you can definitely point to intellectual trends within universities of what we're seeing today. But I think to understand how this has taken root so successfully beyond academia, you really have to look at what was going on in the world outside of universities as well, to look at what was happening in the world politically. And for me, the crucial aspect of this is the kind of collapse of class-based politics and the left's abandonment of the working class as a positive force for political change. And certainly the left politics that I grew up with, and I mean grew up quite literally, in the 1970s, the 1980s, was a left-wing politics that was absolutely rooted within working class communities. And you could see in the MPs who went to the British Parliament, they came from often, not always, but often came from within the trade union movement, had their roots in working class communities, and were very conscious of representing a certain group of people. But I think the left has a long time ago, again, go back to the 1980s, 1990s, really gave up on working class people as a positive force for social change in the world. And I think when they did that, they looked around then for other groups that they could claim to be speaking on behalf of, that they could be claiming to represent. And I think this is where identity politics and what was going on in universities really overlapped with a demand from within the Labour Party of the UK, from within left-wing groups more broadly on an international scale. To be any kind of political party, you need to claim to speak on behalf of a constituency. And if you can't take your constituency as a class-based people, you're pushed to turn towards identity politics and different identity groups as a kind of hodgepodge. That's, give the translators a difficult one, a kind of melee, mismatch of different groups.
A goulash. Very good.
To claim to have some basis. I don't know what.
Well, I was just thinking that I'm not sure I'm giving an answer of why it's there, but I do think there's been a slow erosion of adulthood and authority, again, particularly in the West. So you were before as a teacher, and I have taught, you were perfectly within your rights to say, don't do that. listen to me, and hopefully you'd inspire, but, you know, you do a bit of that as well. That's completely gone. And so, you know, it's no wonder that debate is infantilized, because so is adulthood. And, you know, you see it in the US, and you see it in the UK particularly, that the government just hands over decision making to bodies that have not been voted in, you know, that have just these kind of quangos, so that nobody really is making a decision. And you can see that with the students in colleges and the cry bullies, that instead of adults saying, no, don't treat somebody like that, you know, don't be a mob, don't glue yourself to some, you know, floor or whatever they're doing these days, you know, use your critical faculties, do it differently. You're not getting that. You're getting rewarded as a student, as a young person, from the adults. So there's this erosion of authority, of being able to be an adult, it's gone.
No, sorry. I think that's so important. One of my favourite bits of writing ever is Immanuel Kant's "What is Enlightenment?" and I think he makes. I mean, it's very old, very short, very easy to understand, and I think just speaks as if it was written today. You know, just speaks so well to our situation today. And Kant defines enlightenment as being this kind of rejection of other people coming in and telling us what to do in every aspect of our lives. And he kind of links enlightenment to a striving for adulthood, a striving for us to assume responsibility for our own lives. And I think that's something which we very much need to recapture today. But I think you know, perhaps where I almost don't say this, but where I would slightly differ from Kant is I don't think it's so much that people have wanted other people to assume, perhaps some sections of society do, but I think en masse, you know, it's not like people have wanted an expert class to come in and assume authority for us and to make decisions on our behalf every step of the way of our lives, tell us what to do all the time. But it's more that an expert class have assumed that role. They assume that they have the authority. So one of the things I'm most agitated about in the UK at the moment is sex education in schools. And again, you know, just to state the obvious, I have no problem with children being taught the biological facts of reproduction. I think it's absolutely vital that children know how babies are made. But the problem is the sex education that we have in UK schools goes way, way beyond that. And even in the title of the lesson, you can tell it goes very far beyond that. So it's called Relationships and Sex Education. And this is has been very well thought through, the title, and the decision to put the relationships first prior to the sex is also a very, very deliberate policy. And as it suggests, you know, most of the emphasis is on the relationships bit, not the sex, the biological reproduction bit. And encompassed within that bit on relationships is teaching children about gender identity, teaching children about sexuality, teaching children about what are considered to be appropriate relationships. But as a mother, you know, I just think, how dare you? Who do these people think they are? You know, how I can understand totally how teachers can be experts in history and geography and maths. But the idea that you assume you have the status of an expert in relationships, the most intimate part of what makes us human, of how we interact with other people, the basis of family life, that you assume a certain level of expertise in that, that means you can then go and teach other people and tell children how to conduct a relationship with another person. I think that assumes a level of arrogance that just completely blows my mind. But it's that idea that there is a kind of an elite group, an expert class, a professional class, who assume they know better than everybody else how they should be conducting their lives. And I think to kind of rehabilitate the idea of what is enlightenment in the UK especially, we need to be throwing off the shackles of this expert class who think they can tell us how to conduct every area of our lives.
They seem to hate the family.
I mean, it's no surprise, isn't it? Because that's where who said that it was the hearth of a heartless world? Christopher Lash. It's the family where kids can go and get that kind of warmth and love and know and also know that their parents are bringing them up. But it's no surprise, therefore, that the battleground around identity politics and this new kind of woke, to sum it up in one word, is directed towards the parents. And I remember I don't know when it was, Joe, but in the UK, a lot of parents protested outside their school in Birmingham, and they said something like, leave the kids alone, and then they also said, listen to parents, and it's like, wow, parents have to ask the school to. It's such a simple statement, it's such a simple request, but the school didn't do it, and you can see why, because they want to dismiss parents. Parents have too much control over the kids, and we're doing the kids no service with all of this. It's not as if we want young people to grow up exactly like mother and father, but what we do want for our kids is to teach them how to think for themselves. And a lot of this new way of infantilization, I can't say the word, so I won't bother anymore, but a lot of the new nonsense around debates is for kids that they're not told to think for themselves, but not only that, adults, the media, the institutions that have really taken over with this, even want to preempt our thoughts. So they don't just want to stop our free speech, but they want to preempt what we think, and they're starting with children.
Viv, I'm going to apologise because I'm shamefully ripping off a point that you made earlier when we recorded a podcast, which I'm sure David will plug at the end and can be available. And this was the point Viv made, so sorry, I'm nicking this from what you said. But just this idea you were saying earlier, Viv, about the family actually being the one place in society where people do still speak freely. People do still speak in, there's so many areas of life nowadays where there is kind of compelled speech, or you feel as if you're being watched and monitored in terms of what you're saying, whether that's on university campus or in the workplace, that you kind of have to be on your best behavior, that you have to say the right words, you have to kind of go along with the kind of dominant set of ideas that you're instructed to do this through the training courses, whereas the family kind of becomes the last place where you can unwind. At the end of the day, you can speak freely, where ideas can circulate that are not the approved ideas that are generated within the diversity training sessions and within the university, again, kind of diversity courses that students are set on. And that idea that there is a private sphere where people can oppose the dominant woke ideology, I think is absolutely recognised very explicitly as being a threat to the power of teachers, for example. I mean, if teachers want to tell children, for some reason, wacky reason, that there are 72 genders, and then children are going home and saying, Mum, teacher told me there are 72 genders. And Mum says, no, don't be ridiculous. There's men and women, and no, you're not a cat, then that's something which threatens the dominance of the woke activists. It threatens the dominance of the expert class to seed their ideas unquestioningly within society, and the family's perhaps one of they're aware that the family is one of the last places where this can happen. So I think the attacks on the family are very deliberate and very coordinated.
So part of the agenda, if it's breaking up the family and then it's breaking us down into just atoms in the social, this is and it doesn't like the idea of a private space. In fact, one of the most interesting things about this managerial technocracy is that it thinks it's responsible for everything. And the consequences of that have not only been infantilization, but also an elite remaking of the people. So, you said earlier that the left lost interest in decided the working classes weren't up to it and had to find basically they've looked for another people, and that people has to endorse them, but it has to be trained up. So this is a sort of a long-term project both to infantilize and create a permanent sort of managerial elite that doesn't want speech, really. It wants nodding to the right kind of programming. So you get programmed in a certain way and you respond positively. So it's a kind of behaviorist model with totalitarian effects, isn't it?
Yeah, I was just about to. Well, I grimaced because I thought, do I agree? And I think the thing that I probably would push back on is that I agree with the end bit, but it's as if you're giving them too much credence. I am not sure if this is, if people do sit round and have this big mission that's working so well. I don't think it's that, actually, and that's even worse. That the new technocrats would have taken their position and love their power, but I'm not sure it's seeing it through. To me, and I'm thinking out loud here because I can hear. Excellent. I think it's more that kind of the worry is that it's such a therapeutic culture. So I think that behavioural and that nudging, and we all need therapy, and as a society we do, because people have got such a bad rep now. We're not really good for anything, and we do need the experts, and we don't want too much democracy, and it's that kind of thing that I think that's what's encroaching on us, and it's really having an effect, because to me the biggest threat to having a decent debate and the biggest threat to free speech is what John Stuart Mill called social tyranny. So it's not the boo of the state telling you to shut up. It's that idea that you can't say anything, and you might, you better not think out loud too much, because people don't have any good faith anymore to allow you to think aloud and to change your mind and to rub up it against each other. And that, like in the UK, I think I said it on the podcast, so forgive me for duplicating, but, a survey in the UK found that 60% in the UK were afraid to say things, even to afraid to question something that they didn't really know about. I'm going off in a tangent here, but that's...
No.
It's scary. It's
the
very,
word,
very scary. I again, thinking out loud, I think we could certainly overstate the extent to which this is a conscious project, and I don't think there are kind of gatherings of people who consciously set out to engineer a new type of society. And the danger is you end up sounding like a bit of a conspiracy theorist the more you go down that line. but at the same time, I think you can understate it too. And I think particularly...
Well, they don't seem to like the society they've got.
That's absolutely true. And I think there are, particularly in the sphere of education, there are times when this really does play out quite explicitly. So if you look at, again, go back to the relationships and sex education in UK schools, you can trace this back. It comes from the World Health Organization. It comes from UNESCO. These are obviously not UK-based organizations. These are global organizations who actually do have a very large degree of consciousness of the behavior and the attitudes, more to the point, and the values and the beliefs that they think should exist in the world and that they want to. They're very conscious of education as being a vehicle for bringing about shifts in attitudes and values. And they are very explicit, kind of almost embarrassingly explicit. You almost cringe when you read it. Wow, you're going to say that out loud, because they are clear that they think there are regressive, backward attitudes, i.e. a belief in heterosexual, heteronormative family. They think that is a backward thing, and they think a more progressive, enlightened society would move beyond that. And they're very clear about wanting to bring about changes. I think in the UK, the time, and again, I said this earlier in our podcast, the time when I became most aware of this as an explicit project was working in a university immediately after the Brexit referendum result was announced, and surveys had been done of academics as a whole across the UK, and 90% of academics had said that their intention was to vote for Britain to remain in the EU. And I think for me that really showed two things. It showed the groupthink within academia, the homogeneity of that particular perspective. But it also showed, when the result was announced, how out of touch academics were with the rest of society. Now, for me as an academic, that is something I would have been ashamed of. If I felt as if I was so out of touch with what the mass of people in my country were thinking, I would have been embarrassed to admit that. But on the contrary, a lot of academics, and they would say this to me, and I would cringe. They say, "Oh, you voted Leave. Oh, you're the first person I've met who's a Leave voter," or you're the only person I know who voted Leave, as if this was a kind of badge of honor. And inside, I'm embarrassed to admit I didn't say it out loud very often, I'm thinking, my goodness me, you really need to get out more. You need to speak to a few more people, and you should not be so proud of the fact that what you're admitting to is that you live in an intellectual and political bubble. And that's not a good thing. You should get and speak to more people, so you're aware of why the majority of people in your country don't feel the same way as you. But anyway, sorry to go back. What then happened, certainly on the university campus I worked at, and I think this was common across the country as a whole, academics also had a moment where they realized they were at odds. But rather than taking humility from that, which is what I would have done, what they took from that was a much stronger sense of, well, we were obviously right. Those ignorant, stupid people didn't realize that we were right. And a moment of real consciousness that we have some power here, because 50% of young people in the UK now go to universities. We can use this as an opportunity to very consciously promote the values that we think are important, and kind of as an act of charity would be how they would present it. We can re-educate these ignorant people out of their backward ideas and kind of insist that they take on board our ideas instead. And for me, this is very much why I think we've seen a real escalation in the promotion of a woke outlook very much over the past kind of 7 years. I would say these things have ramped up.
And we said earlier, it was not just Brexit, but Trump as well that created this sort of...
A lot of people lost the plot. And I was in America when Trump won, and in amongst the media, and the individuals that I knew from Wall Street Journal and other places, we might not have agreed on everything, but we used to go for a drink and whatever. They had totally changed, and they were openly saying to me, God, I used to believe in democracy, but actually now I think that's a bad thing. And we can see how actually, I think after Brexit and Trump, something quite nasty started to happen, where the people that were absolutely stunned that the majority of people could actually vote not their way began to start recasting people like Joe and I who voted Leave, or we've done a film around Trump voters. A lot of them voted for Obama before and then Trump. They want change. But to vilify them and to see them almost as a caste apart, like a race apart, and therefore they shouldn't really get democracy, that's really there. And it shows not the violence, although I would like to say something about that, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
I haven't got a good segue, so there you go.
What about the violence?
Thanks, mate. Thanks. No, but it shows that even from the anti-democratic nature and anti-humans or the people who were against them, I'm reminded that when this is an important debate, and I'm glad you said cry bullies. Again, I'm sort of taking the young people a little bit away from it, and I'm talking about the adults in the room. Because as soon as you start to say, and I can understand it, that we're going to censor you because there are people who are going to be hurt. And we don't want to hurt people. Who wants to hurt people? But if you think about it, actually, it's more violent. And my example is the Charlie Hebdo and the 12 people who were massacred in 2015 just for being journalists, just for being cartoonists. And that was the violent expression of the official idea that you can't give offence. And I mean, but that's important. That's at the core of what we're talking about when we're talking about and wanting to talk to you about what's happened to debate, what's happened to free speech, and how I don't actually blame some of the young people who are being mobs in their colleges and we can do loads of examples of that.
It's a sort of suffocating niceness that
there is, but I mean, I think it also tracks back to what we were talking about at the start of this discussion about the importance of the kind of privileging of feelings over any sense of reality as well. So at risk of making out like me and Viv are complete jet setters, which unfortunately we're not as much as we would like to be, a little bit, but not as much as we would like to be. So I was also in the US after Trump's victory, but I was not in media circles. I was on a university campus to give a talk about free speech. And, the similarities with the way academics there responded to Trump's victory with the way British academics responded to the Brexit referendum, I mean, were just so stark and so obvious. And I kind of cringe, and I'm embarrassed to admit that it was people walking around crying, on my university in the UK after the referendum. Oh my goodness me, it was like a grief fest. It was just people sitting around in the staff canteen, in the university cafeterias, just weeping and wailing, quite literally. I wish I was making this up, but I'm not. They were sobbing openly. And this was exactly the same on the US campus after the election of Trump as well. Fully grown adult academics, not remotely in control of their own emotions, just weeping and wailing because Trump had been elected. And now whatever you think of Trump, and even whatever you think of Brexit, crying is not actually an argument. It's not engaging with the reality of what's just happened. They weren't asking, well, why? What were people trying? What message were people trying to send at the ballot box? Why did our arguments opposing Trump or opposing Brexit, why were they not convincing? It was just a complete emotional outburst, and a very infantile emotional outburst. And for me, as being the kind of person on the opposing sides in both of those camps, you want to engage in a debate, you want to have a discussion, but when the person you're trying to engage in a debate with is just crying, it makes discussion and debate, a rational discussion and debate, actually a very, very difficult thing to do.
But it also sort of not only, I think the point about feelings is very important, because if you went back to your Kant analogy, the importance for Kant was you reasoned, that being taught to reason was a release from tutelage. But reason is not wanted, and ironically, it's not wanted on campuses. They don't want an argument, they want a debate. So this abandonment of reason for feeling, and then the feelings that are released are often rage, and so the fact that you start with crying, and then you go to rage. How could this happen? And the rage is, directed then against what's seen to be those who are unenlightened. Not to use Kant's term, but what they see as unenlightenment, which is the sort of the mass of white peasants, really.
No, I think it's absolutely true. But Kant probably makes this point better and more obviously makes this point better and more succinctly than I will. But I don't know his quote. I can't think of the quote he uses, but I'm sure he makes this point that reasoning is like a muscle. It's something you have to exercise. It's something you have to work at. I think people are innately I like to think people are innately rational, but we all have to work at these things, and you have to be, as a child, I think you have to be taught and encouraged and led to use reason rather than emotion. And that obviously continues through to maturity. And it's something that if every step of the way, emotion, partly emotion, but also, again, to come back to what we were talking about earlier, if you're told that you're fragile, that you're vulnerable, those things get in the way of being able to use reason and rationality. And I think, sorry, everybody, but to go back to the relationships and sex education, the word in that's also, I find, incredibly offensive, as we're talking about taking offense, is education. Because these lessons, they call themselves relationships and sex education. But to my mind, that is not education at all. It's the opposite of education. It's indoctrination. Nobody is being allowed to think critically in those classes. They are being told what to think. So it should be sued under the Trades Description Act. It's not education, it's indoctrination. And unfortunately, that spills over. It's not just in the relationships and sex education, but so much of what passes, and I'll use the word schooling rather than education, is now just indoctrination. It's being told what to think, not how to think, or not being given content to engage with critically, but it's being told, the correct beliefs and attitudes and values. And when you indoctrinate people, you take away from them their capacity to reason and engage rationally themselves, which doesn't mean people lose it for all time, doesn't mean people don't want to regain that muscle and have opportunities to exercise that muscle, but too often they're denied it.
I think, when we were talking earlier, you made the point about one of these demonstrations against, in Black Lives Matter, the Antifa demonstration and a CNN News.
Yeah, it was in Portland, and Portland actually was in a lot of trouble for months. I mean, they barricaded and were violent. They barricaded themselves in the town hall and in all sorts of institutions, but the door was open anyway because there's no adults in the room. But there was, it went around the net. You probably saw it, that there was this CNN reporter. I don't know why I'm doing this. And there was just violence and, fire everywhere behind him. And he said, this is an absolutely peaceful demonstration. And behind him was just, mayhem. But truth, you don't need, you're not catching on here. Truth doesn't matter. Are we going to go back to the...
Yeah, okay. If you insist. I was enjoying myself. Okay, so... well, one last question to both of you. Is there any hope?
Well, I always want to think that there's hope. There's a good George Orwell line on that, isn't there, from 1984 as well, which I was...
Boot stamping on a human face forever.
No, but if there's hope, it lies with the proles,
Yes.
was the line I was thinking of, and I think there's probably a lot of truth in that. Anyway, sorry, no. I think there's hope because I think, well, two things. I think the fact that so much of... kind of, again, to use the term kind of woke values are compelled, even just the very fact that when I was speaking previously, I talked about indoctrination, not education. If the people promoting these values were genuinely confident in what they were doing, if they thought there was a moral weight, a convincing moral weight behind these arguments, they would not be so scared of questions and criticality and people engaging on an intellectual and a political level. So one thing that's just been in the news in the UK this week in relation to sex education is the fact that schools don't let parents see the material that's being used. So parents can't withdraw their children from the classes, and parents are not even allowed to see what it is that children are being taught. Now, you could see that as a power move. I mean, totally, it's a power move. We're going to teach your children all this rubbish, and we're not even going to let you know what we are teaching them. But another way of looking at that is it is a massive sign of insecurity. If they were totally confident in this agenda that they are promoting, they would say, we have no problem. Everybody can see, because we think that this is genuinely a morally good thing that we're doing, and it's something we are absolutely able to defend. And the fact that they can't do that, and they won't do that, and the fact that things like pronoun badges for people in the workplace, pronoun emails on signatures, the fact that these things are compelled, either through social pressure or through actual instruction of you will do this, you will wear this, that the compliance is compelled, again, is a sign of the lack of intellectual, political, moral confidence in what they're doing. And that makes me confident. It gives me hope, because it makes me think that as soon as we are, that these ideas clearly are open to being challenged, they're not rigorously and firmly held. These are ideas they have to compel because they can't convince, and they're aware of the fact that they can't convince.
And quickly, I think you can see little springs of protests going on all over the place. The farmers, the truckers,
farmers,
the French workers. There are people not having it, and there are also parents getting together, and so I'm always optimistic that people will win through with reason, and I do think it's absolutely incumbent on people who can speak out. I mean, I'm in a lucky position, right? I work at Spite. I'm not going to be sacked for what I say. But there are people, thousands of people, who do need to be careful. I understand that. So it's incumbent on the people who don't to really keep kicking back, not just in the public, but actually when you're with your family and friends. It's important.
Okay, great. So there should be some questions about all this, I think, from you. We got someone with a mic is rushing down to you at this moment.
That I was very active in Hungarian feminism from about 2014 or 15. I gotta turn this on, yeah? Or just speak into it, yeah. So what I've tried is actually engaging a debate with this kind of. There used to be no word back then for woke. Just kind of, like these people who were sort of the social entrepreneurs bringing this discursive toolkit into Hungary. And since then, I think what became obvious that many of these people are extremely toxic, highly sociopathic, power-hungry, narcissistic, and you're exposing yourself to danger. If you pretend, because, what I think where real debate starts, you have to be interested in the thoughts of your opponents. And to be honest, I'm not interested in the kind of nonsense they think. I'm very interested behind the mechanisms, how they are able to form these networks of power and how's that instrumentalized. But these people, let's just be obvious about it, they're insane. Sadistic, insane, narcissistic. And when you expose yourself to them, it kind of endangers you. That's what's happened to me. And what was behind this kind of... Because in Hungary, there used to be, I think they are still active, the Friedrich Stiftung. And they had this explicit agenda to engage people in a dialogue. It's very patronizing. If like random Hungarian people, wouldn't be able to talk with each other. And they wanted, like completely like non-NGO, like people in me, like working in academia, like people who are not like working for political lobbies, to engage with lobbyists and activists. And we were very much like we were not on the same grounds. And it ended catastrophically. It was horrible. We had to pretend we become friends and we will agree. And we even reached a compromise. It was like disgusting. It was like, like sending us to the slaughter. So it's like it's not like well-intentioned opposing sides will come to a rational argument, because that's not what they are. So that was my subjective experience in the topic.
I would just say very, very quickly on that I think certainly you have to separate out, I think, in your head, who it is you're talking to. And I agree, there are some real hardcore committed activists in gender politics, in Black Lives Matter, who not only are so emotionally invested and politically and ideologically invested, but also, let's be honest, have a financial stake in what they're promoting, which they do not want to lose. And that makes them very fierce opponents. But I think the point is that it's a small proportion of society as a whole. And there's a much, much bigger proportion of society who either go along with this because nobody's ever challenged them or put before them a different idea, or go along with this just kind of out of cowardice, and that they're scared to challenge, or they don't want to appear to be a nasty person. And I think those people, are open to debate and reason and argument, and it's a question of working out, really. There are going to be some people who it's not worth it, and others who it is.
Yeah, I would agree. You've just described the nastiness of the hashtag be kind. If I see a hashtag be kind, I don't trust them. They have to work at it. But I would do the same. I wouldn't. I agree with you. Why give the time to that? But what you would be interested in, what I would be interested in, is the people in that room who aren't certain, who are the same as you, thinking, what can I say? What can I do? And I'm not saying anything new here, but you need your numbers to win, and they're out there.
We got another question here.
Hi. So I can completely understand what you're saying in the UK. I lived there for 15 years, and it's exactly how you describe it. It's very toxic. You can't really speak your mind, and it's very kind of difficult to really kind of put any opinion through because of the nature of this discussion. But I feel that here, the UK and the US can be really in a bubble, and they think, oh, it's exactly the same everywhere. In Hungary and in the Balkans, where I was just recently, in Serbia and Bosnia and Croatia, it just doesn't exist. It's like people don't even understand the word pronoun, or they don't understand non-binary. Like, you think that it's literally happening everywhere, but when you actually speak to people, I spoke to so many people in so many places, they don't understand any of this, and they're concerned with so many other things. And this is actually only introduced to these regions by the NGOs. And this is why I think it's definitely not a leftist movement. And this is why people are mistakenly say it's leftist, but leftist should be, you know, bottom up, and it's always top down. So always the NGOs pushing it down to the public. So in a sense, don't you think it's very similar to previous kind of top-down movements like, you know, Nazism, communism, or any sort of kind of religious crusades, when people were trying to bring in almost liberation to the public in the guise of, you know, so basically oppress opinions and ideas in the guise of, you know, social justice. And putting it through education and, you know, the same kind of systems. Because when you think about it, all these NGOs, like when you go to Pride or BLM, like all these institutions have their flags, you know, most companies, you know, Ernst & Young, and whenever you look at, you know, bankers, they're always promoting it. So it can't be, you know, it can't be a workers' movement or a leftist movement. It's definitely opposed, like put on the public from the top.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's music to my ears. I must move to Croatia. That's but it's also the fact that I'm glad you mentioned NGOs, because actually that part of that section of institutions, you know, they're seen as cute and cuddly and warm, but they are the ones that are trying to go around the world and put upon other people. But I see a kickback, and that's great.
Okay. There's a lady in the front here. In the group.
I also... Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So because of my age, you know, I became adult in the communist regime. So it's the pattern that you mentioned, it was very similar where I grown up and how this whole thing worked. And I think, you know, part of the reason why this part of Europe, it doesn't really work, because we, the older people, absolutely remember what happened and how, you know, the Communist Party feel the expert and even punish those workers who didn't think along. And my question is that whatever you said, it seems kind of like a dangerous movement, and silent majority is not enough to fight against it. So my question is that what kind of institutions you can see that can basically fight back against this whole thing?
Good question.
Oh, very, very good question. You know, I mean, I think what's very interesting in the situation of the UK is that and people often ask me, you know, why is it the case that you've had all these movements within schools, within universities, and you've had a conservative government for the past 13 years? You know, how can these two things match up? And I think why this has happened is because, well, it makes me question, where does power really lie in society, and what power do voters actually have? Because it seems that people clearly voted, well, nobody in the UK voted for Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. You know, it was Boris Johnson who was elected, and then Liz Truss was voted for by a smaller minority, obviously much smaller minority, but still by some Conservative Party members. And yet we end up with a Prime Minister who essentially has just been foisted upon us. And that's an insult, I think, to the voters who, back in the last general election, made their intentions very, very clear. But even when you had kind of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, it seemed that his power was actually quite limited in comparison to the power of the cultural institutions, of the people who are the civil servants, the people who are running schools, universities, museums, art galleries, the BBC. All of these institutions are aware of that. They have a power that if a government minister might turn around one day and say, you know, we want this to happen. And then, well, we don't like that. We don't want to do that. So we just won't. And that means that the democratic will of the people is being disrespected. You know, the people are making their intentions clear at the ballot box, but then the leaders of the cultural institutions are completely disregarding it and doing what they want to do. And that's why I actually think kind of what's happening here in Hungary about kind of taking voters seriously in terms of what happened at the ballot box, so seriously that you're going to say this isn't just a question of making policies, but it's actually a question of looking at what's going on in education, in the media, in cultural institutions, and thinking how can that also reflect what it was that voters wanted, and actually taking democracy seriously to that extent that you're not just going to sit there and make policies, but you're going to actually make sure that those policies get properly implemented. And I think for me that's a very could be a very important beacon and model for what takes place in the rest of the world. And it really shows the limitations of what we have in the UK right now.
Yeah, I mean, haven't got much to add, but on a upbeat note, I mean, we have got a lot of work to do. That's absolutely for sure. But you can, if I just take the media for an example, you know, there is no the mainstream media is dead, really, and it's things like it's publications that are online or not, but like Spiked, that is actually getting a lot of people involved and a lot of people reading and a lot of people saying, yes, free speech is important. And, you know, you can't keep a good person down. I think people are going elsewhere for what they need. And it is beginning to become a bit of a network.
Yeah. Okay, there's someone at the back there. Oh,
hello, everyone. I actually became a Hungarian citizen. I saw what was happening in America years ago, and I needed to escape. I couldn't live like that. I don't know how long you spent there, but it's interesting. I could, of course, give 90 minutes worth of horrible. I was in a Starbucks that Antifa attacked. I have it on video. I filmed it when it happened, and when I show it to woke people, they just shrug their shoulders. And it would literally be if 300 people with pipes smashed out all these, and you just sat there. So I had to get out of it. And I love the hope talks, but I don't, it's so pervasive in America and most likely in the UK. Like if you go to I just took pictures of this, of a piece of art from 1810, and there's a figure crouched over, and the person actually wrote and everyone in the painting is white, and it says the figure is crouching as if they're being whipped as a slave. Like, it has absolutely nothing to do with this. And, you know, so it's very, so I'm where I'm at now, because we all do it. Rod Dreher, I don't see him, but he knows we do it. We all just bitch about it. And then we go, you know, do this. What I would love is actual tools. And do you guys watch or listen to Peter Boghossian at all? Okay, so you know about the woman that escaped woke and blah, blah, blah. He just did a 70-minute interview with her. But it's like, we're all individuals, which is great. But like, I almost feel like we need something stronger than getting together and just talking about what's happening. Yeah. And I mean, I'm doing the same thing, but I came to Hungary, and it's I'll say one more thing. So I just went to this film festival in Bratislava. There was an American producer there, and all during the talk, he was talking about how Hungary is like Germany in 1939, and like, you know, and I'm like, and I'm just like, this is heaven. we're in heaven. You know, it is so wonderful. And it's really so interesting how one of these websites or a comment on Facebook or something so simple completely warps out the view of the individual. You know, and I was taught something very different. We had a class in debate in high school, and we'd prepare and we'd get ready. And then as soon as we're about to do it, the teacher would go, okay, switch sides.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we had to fight for the thing that we were taught to tear down. So I come from a very different mindset than Team Blue, Team Red, and all that. But it's like, do you guys talk about this at all? Like setting up little, like if there was a once a week thing here and we go, maybe try this, because I find any type, like just last week, a friend of mine said, people are telling me what to do. And I said, oh, you mean in a woke way? All of a sudden, this girl came out of nowhere, tagged 3 friends and said, girls, we got to teach this guy a lesson. And all I did was type the word woke. And I found out that they canceled a guy in the UK, not because he touched anyone or kissed them or anything, but because he went out with more than one woman at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, we've got plenty.
Yeah, okay. So, anyways, my point is, can we go past the examples that we can all do?
So,
go ahead.
Itching to jump in here. So, I know I've talked a lot about hope, and I think it is important to stay positive because, just psychologically, I don't feel as if despair and depression gets us anywhere. But I also think there's something more important than that as well. And to be serious in terms of what you're saying. For me, and I didn't make this clear, so I'm welcoming your comment and an opportunity to clarify this, because I think what, for me, is just as important as hope is responsibility. And responsibility is something I take very, very seriously. Responsibility for my family, responsibility for my community, responsibility for my nation, which sounds very grand, but for me, this is about not just being hopeful in the sense of I'm just going to sit back passively and wait until kind of for some point in the future where something magic happens and people wake up and just think, oh, do you know what? We don't like this anymore. We want things to be different. But I'm going to actively assume responsibility as an adult for, and I'm not suggesting this is easy for 1 second, and I don't want to give that impression, but to come and sit here, to write articles for Spiked, to continue with publications that will give me a platform, and to carry on making those arguments, and doing that on a daily basis for me is an act of assuming responsibility for the world, sounding very grand now, but for actually actively trying to change things as much as I have it in my capacity to be able to do that. So it is hope, definitely, but it's not a passive hope. It's an active hope that I'm going to make these arguments. I'm going to talk to young people. I'm going to talk to old people. I'm going to write books. I'm going to write articles. I'm going to appear on podcasts. And Viv, even better, is actually producing these things that are giving me the platform to be able to do that. But in hope, then, in a sense that I'm also assuming responsibility for that, and I'm going to try and actively make that happen.
I mean, I would say the same thing, Spiked. That's what we're driven for. We have a platform. We do podcasts, articles, all the rest of it, and we say the unsayable. Brenda, now chief political writer, has just written a book, A Heretic's Manifesto, Essays on the Unsayable. And I slightly cringe at all of this. I'm just about to say is that Joe and I actually had this conversation about what's next. What more do we have to do? And there's a woman who does politics in a pub, and I cringe at the fact that kind of, is that enough? Who knows? Well, we could all put that down and say, oh, well, Spike's not enough, politics in the pub's not enough. But it does spring, and I actually am really still very excited because of Brexit and because of Trump. I'm not particularly a fan of Trump, but just when we weren't expecting it, just when we thought people didn't really vote anymore, just when we thought that actually the majority of people have been well and truly silenced, vote comes up, and then it's, the people that we don't like are on the back foot. So as long as we make sure we keep pushing them, because they are on the back foot, the better.
So, and just to chime in with that very, very quickly, the thing Brexit taught me, like a real salutary lesson, is how quickly things can change. Yeah. So, all my life, like literally all my life, Britain had been a member of the European Union. And growing up, it was unthinkable that Britain wouldn't be a member of the European Union. And then suddenly it wasn't. And it showed that things, again, to quote Hemingway, about bankruptcy, things change gradually and then they change suddenly. And Brexit was a real lesson in how this, you make the arguments gradually and then things change suddenly, I think really comes about.
There's someone at the back there, just...
Just to connect a previous comment, of course, Hungary is not like the UK or the US. And I absolutely agree that this is a top-down phenomenon in Hungary, but it's not just the NGOs here. It's also the multinational companies. It's going to be the next front, spreading this to their employees, but also through these CSR things. And also, of course, like the pop culture and the social media are massively influential and influencing young people. So, of course, if I look at my generation, then woke is absolutely a minority thing. But among the youngsters, these channels are very, very influential. So this is a slow culture war, a kind of slow culture war. It's progressing slowly. But among the younger people, this is very influential. And of course, like the mainstream media is not so important, but it is also in Hungary, it's connected to various NGOs. They're not very transparent, these medias, how they are being financed by NGOs, but some are definitely. So, and this is why woke is so much present in the liberal mainstream media. But I think that it is the popular culture and the social media that is the most dangerous. And of course, there are massive industries that have a stake in this, especially in the transgender phenomenon, like the biotechnological industry, also related to the information technologies. And these are the kind of actors that I think really need to be looked at, and somehow this is a front that needs to be taken up. How do you think that would be possible?
Sorry, I don't mean to. I'm not laughing at you, but I'm thinking, it's. I don't want to keep saying the same thing, but yes, there's a lot of institutions that will just talk the talk. There's a lot of institutions that might even believe in all of this, and we've got an uphill struggle. There's no point lying about that, but you can do this, and even as an individual, this might say, what am I trying to say? We've been talking about how debate is infantilized, and the victimhood culture that we have now. And what that is doing for young people and individuals is it's meaning that you don't build up your confidence as a really robust individual. And the only point is to build up your confidence as an individual is to take those risks. Because as a confident individual, that means that you can go out in the world. And so, do anything you can as an individual and look out for small groups, big groups that are doing something different. I mean, look out online, look out in person, do a bit of a protest, get a pub together, talk to people you don't agree with, invite them, be relentless.
The only thing I'd add to that is I totally agree with the point you're making about this not just being NGOs, but being through multinational corporations as well. I actually think that's brilliant, because I think when I walk down the high street in the UK and you see that every bank, every law firm, every global company, it has got, now it's June, it's Pride Month, they've all got these rainbow flags in the windows, because that exposes the lie of this being in any way, shape or form a bottom-up movement, a movement of the kind of the oppressed rising up and fighting for their rights. Bring it on, because it absolutely exposes the extent to which this is a top-down elite project that's being enforced upon the people.
Yeah, very good. We got Benche down here. So.
Thank you very much. Ákos Bencegáz from the Danube Institute. So my question is, you mentioned the critical thinking at universities, and I went to a university in France, Sciences Po, which was famous for the critical thinking, which meant we had something to read, and we had to be critical about, or we had a professor saying something, and we were able to debate. We were asked to debate with them, and it was very, very challenging experience, and it was a very attractive experience. So my question is, how does the picture look like from the student side? I mean that if they go to a school where they are taught the woke ideology, what is their reaction? Do they expect some more? And if they go to your classes where you express other opinion, are they satisfied? Are they organizing themselves in order to have alternative debates? What is your experience about this? And an important point that at the Danube Institute now we have almost 20 students, like interns, young people, and I think that shows the hope. Thank you very much.
No, definitely. And I think the important point, one important point that shows is that I really hesitate in terms of talking about students or young people as one homogenous group, because, clearly they're not, and very, very different and diverse group of people, so it's a bit reluctant to consider everybody together. But in terms of the kind of broader trends, my experience is that a lot of young people, unfortunately, kind of want a quiet life, and at university are happy just to go along and write what's expected of them and do what they need to do to pass the exams and get the kind of the grades and are off kind of having a life somewhere outside of the university, because academia has not become for them a kind of exciting, consuming intellectual project. In terms of criticality, I think the definition of criticality has changed over the past 30, 40 years. For me, being critical was being idiosyncratic. It was thinking, kind of trying to be unique, trying to be original, trying to come at something from a different imaginative perspective, to join dots from different things that you'd read and apply them in different circumstances. Unfortunately, I think what young people are taught nowadays is that being critical means being critical in the same way as everyone else is critical, and be critical in the way that your lecturer wants you to be critical. So we've kind of taken the criticality out of being critical, which is tragic, very, very sad indeed. But I again, at risk of sounding like a naive optimist, I don't think I am a naive optimist, but I don't think all young people buy into this. I think bright young people want more. They're aware that they're not getting it. They're aware that they need to find it in other areas of their lives. But I do believe that there is an appetite for more. There is an appetite to think critically. In the same way that Viv was talking about Trump, I'm not a huge fan of Jordan Peterson by any stretch of the imagination, and that's a separate issue. We can go into why, later if you want. But I think what really interested me when Jordan Peterson began to hugely take off online was why so many young people had an appetite for these kind of long intellectual lectures. What need was that addressing that these young people were not getting in the context of a university. And it suggested to me that there was a big group of people out there who wanted more. They wanted to be taken seriously, you know, and they wanted something else, something more. And you know, those are the people I think we really need to be speaking to.
2 quick examples. So what we run a young journalist academy for 16 to 18-year-olds in the summer. And we absolutely doggedly give them other points of views and make them think and challenge them. And, you know, they're a bit shell-shocked on the first day, but you can see just in a week that confidence go up. And, you know, last year we were trying to do some filming to get some more money, but I didn't use it. But this student turned around and said, yeah, it was brutal, absolutely brutal, but it was brilliant, you know, and that's the kind of thing. And then the other thing that Spike did is that we set up the free speech university rankings for the first time in the UK. We ranked all the universities on their free speech. They were rubbish. And so then we went up and down the country and got students in the different universities to open up a free speech group and have debates. And there was a lot of youngsters or students that wanted to do that. They wanted not to just sit down, and they got a lot of flack for it, but it was successful. So, you know.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just curious about this idea of non-rational argumentation that people with woke beliefs sometimes use, like feelings, or the idea that truth is completely subjective. But I find in conversations with people with these beliefs, sometimes they if you really press them on it, they actually do believe in objective truth. And I think a good piece of evidence for that is that they are so absolute in some of these woke beliefs. So why do you think it is that they're using these forms of argumentation if they really do believe in objective truth?
Well, first of all, just to say that I agree with the point you're making there, and it is very interesting, and it's almost as if we've created new moral absolutes. You know, we've created new objective truths. So the phrase that always makes me chuckle is when people talk about sex assigned at birth, because it kind of creates this impression that a doctor or a midwife kind of randomly comes round and looks at babies and kind of says, boy, girl, in a completely kind of haphazard way, just assigning somebody. So that has, the idea of biological sex has almost become a kind of personal truth. Yet at the same time, gender identity, when you come out and you declare, you know, I am a man, that has to be assumed to be a kind of statement of absolute truth that cannot possibly, particularly if a child says it, you know, heaven forbid you dare question that. You know, it must be just assumed as a statement of absolute truth. So I think we've kind of completely subverted notions, but we've created new absolute truths. So I can't remember the second part of your question. Can you just very, very...
Just why do you think it is that they're using these?
Oh, yes, yeah. No, absolutely. Sorry, thank you. Because I think, to come back to the points we were making at the beginning, we've taught young people to recognize their own vulnerability, to present themselves to the world as being vulnerable. And in the adults, they see crying over Brexit, crying over Trump. We've taught them that feelings are the trump card in an argument, and that this is the way to conduct yourself as an adult, that this is acceptable. We've taught them, but more to the point, we've taught them that you know, to kind of have an emotional response is a greater, better, more absolute response than to argue on the basis of rationality and reason. And again, in terms of adults assuming responsibility, you know, that's our fault. That's on us. You know, maybe not on you, but that's on my generation of teachers and academics who have led a generation of young people to see themselves in that way and to think that that's what it means to engage in intellectual discussion.
I thought we did. Well, anyway. When a great Welsh poet was asked in his local bar what he wanted, his response was more. Unfortunately, we can't have any more, so we'll just have to draw a veil over proceedings there.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.